On September 30th, 1914, we began the assault on Roye, the following troops taking part: 80th Fusiliers, 81st, 87th and 88th Infantry Regiments of the 18th Army Corps, 82nd, 83D, 84th and 85th Infantry Regiments of the 21st Army Corps. There were thus 8 infantry regiments, not to speak of the artillery, who had previously destroyed the town, especially the northern part. This bombardment did the French much harm. The orphanage, which had been turned into a hospital, was set on fire, and many of the wounded were burned alive. We left the town in pursuit of the French, but almost immediately we had to seek shelter in a sand pit on the road from Roye to Amiens. As we were coming out of Roye, 6 French soldiers who had not been able to rejoin their comrades surrendered. Major Schlegler of the 3rd Battalion immediately ordered those soldiers who were standing nearby to shoot these unfortunate men. But not one of them would execute this barbaric command, and all tried to get away. Then Schlegler, with his revolver, killed one of the French soldiers, telling his men, "If you don't obey me, I'll kill you like him." So the remaining 5 prisoners were shot down by the soldiers. Schlegler, however, couldn't boast for long of his cruelty, for hardly had the last prisoner fallen, when he himself was shot from the left. He, in his turn, fell dead. Lieutenant Abraham delivered the funeral oration. Such a death was too fine for this murderer. At almost the same time, Cador was quite seriously wounded, his right forearm being shattered by a bullet. The soldiers did not hesitate to say that the man who had shot at him had unfortunately not aimed quite accurately enough. Everyone was happy about it, and men came up to him, laughing in their sleeves, while asking him hypocritically, "Is the lieutenant suffering much?" "No," answered Cador, making a wry face. Come, buck up and show that you are a Prussian officer," said Schmidt. The latter, showing his right hand, which had just then been slightly scratched by a passing shell, added, "Now I've had enough of this rotten business. I'm going home. Let those who want to fight, fight. I don't." With these words, Schmidt bade us goodbye and went to the field hospital. Right after this, he left for Germany. On the next day, we heard that Colonel Puder had feigned illness, and that he also had left for Germany. On our right, the 25th Division had just taken possession of Soyencourt and Fresnales-Roye. The 87th took Parvillers. On October 3rd, Lieutenant Colonel Brentano was made commander of the 88th. Our new battalion chief was Captain Barch, a former orderly of the commander of the 21st Division. On that day, we took Quesnoy-en-Santerre, which was in ruins. We found nothing there but some poultry. On October 7th, 1914, we were joined by reinforcements from Mayence. Among them were many soldiers who had already been wounded and had recovered. They did not show any enthusiasm. October 5th, 1914, the new trench warfare commenced for us. Each battalion spent 2 days resting behind the lines, and then 4 days in the trenches. We took up our quarters at Carapuy, near Roye. From October 13th to 26th, we stayed before Quesnoy-en-Santerre. During this time, the troops had the big job of digging and arranging the trenches. On October 27th, the French attacked us simultaneously from 3 sides, and we lost our first line trenches. When we reported this bit of news to Lieutenant Anspach, regimental adjutant, he said, "You are a band of cowards, and you ought to be ashamed of being Germans." This Anspach, a fellow of Cador's type, was himself the greatest coward in the regiment, and during engagements spent most of his time with the kitchens. Now he was almost always in a dugout. On October 28th, the Army Corps ordered us to attack in order to regain our first-line trenches, but the French gave us a fine reception. We were completely beaten, leaving 400 prisoners, 2 guns and 4 machine guns in the hands of the enemy. We also lost all our telephone apparatus, and had to retreat still further to a place about 200 metres north of Damery. We had had nothing to eat for 2 days, and in front of us lay more than 200 German corpses. Finally, on November 2nd, we were relieved and sent to rest up at Soyencourt until November 6th. Now we had to turn the trenches into veritable forts. They had to be very deep, with communicating passageways. Comfortable and safe shelters were dug, both for officers and soldiers. There were doors, beds, chairs, mattresses. In our battalion, we even had a piano. In December, electricity was installed. We were bombarded 3 times a day, but the shells did not do much damage. Every evening at 9 o'clock, the kitchens served us a hot meal, with tea, rum, and other alcoholic drinks. At 4 in the morning, they brought us hot coffee. Some men thought the life was quite bearable in comparison with our past sufferings. We now spent all our rest periods in Roy itself, in spite of the bombardments, and we remained there 4 days at a time. A captain of the 80th was appointed governor of the city. He chose as mayor a baker named Lefebvre, making him responsible for anything that might come up. He had to draw up a list of all the inhabitants. All men from 16 to 44 were sent to Germany. Everyone else had to work for the Germans. From December on, all the women had to wash for the German soldiers. They earned 1 franc a day, paid by the city with vouchers, while all contributions had to be paid in silver or gold. Others had to make sandbags for the trenches. The men cleaned the streets and pulled down houses which were too badly damaged. 3, named by the mayor, acted as policemen. As a matter of fact, the soldiers scarcely benefited at all from these rest periods, because every day they had 1 hour of company drill and at least 2 hours of battalion drill. At noon there was a medical inspection and a review. At 1 o'clock, patriotic singing. These prescribed duties had to be completed whether there was a bombardment or not. Pretending that its steeple served as a target for the French artillery, the Chief of Staff ordered the Church of Roy to be pulled down. It gave our engineers great pleasure to execute this order, and soon only the foundations of the building were left. The chairs, stalls, the pulpit, confessionals and the pews were used for firewood by the soldiers. These men preferred staying in the trenches to resting behind the lines. There they were really better sheltered from shells, and furthermore did not have to drill. The headquarters of the battalions and companies were permanently established. In every evening the sergeant-majors came to the trenches to make their reports. Some men who were in with the non-commissioned officers were permanently attached to the office and walked about town, running after women or getting drunk. The kitchens and all the offices were also at Roy. Many non-commissioned as well as commissioned officers obtained mistresses, almost always by threat and violence. On December 22nd, our battalion celebrated Christmas 2 days ahead of time, because on the 24th we were to go back to the trenches, and it was easier to have a celebration in the city. The captain who commanded the battalion in the absence of Schmidt, who, since his recovery, was commanding a detachment at Ham, addressed us as follows. Dear comrades, we cannot celebrate this German holiday in the midst of our families. A world of enemies is marshalled against us in order to crush us and to seize our property, our wives, our children. Cowards that they are, they attacked us. But we've shown them that we're still the same old Germans who know how, sword in hand, to defend themselves and to protect their country. We are fighting, and we are ready to die for this holy cause. I ask you to shout with me, Long live His Majesty, Emperor William II. Hoch, hoch, hoch. Lieutenant Nolte of the 6th Uhlans thanked the captain, and then some soldiers, grouped about a piano, started the song, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. 1. Just as they finished the last verse, a shell burst behind the wall in the cemetery. Some soldiers who went out came back and told us that several graves had been torn open, and that the limbs and remains of the dead were scattered all over. This incident rather dampened our enjoyment of this Stille Nacht. When the celebration was over, the soldiers went back to their companies, where they got beer and alcoholic drinks in such quantities that soon all of them were disgustingly drunk. They scattered through the streets, knocking at doors of houses where they knew that ladies were living. It is true, patrols had been ordered, as is usually done on such occasions, but the patrols themselves and their commanders were as drunk as the others, and instead of punishing them, they helped them make a racket and cause disorder. In our battalion we had a beer evening, at which all the officers were present. One knows what that is. As long as it lasts, no other drinks ought to be taken. But there were so many other drinks that soon the officers were as badly off as the soldiers. On December 24th, 1914, our new chief, Major Rogger, arrived. He was a former captain of the 65th Infantry from Cologne, whence he had been removed because he was too cruel to his men. Then he had been sent to the general staff at Berlin, where he was made a battalion chief. After this, he became commander of the fort at Stuttgart. Roger, who was a great coward and was coming to the front for the first time, was very much afraid of shells. When he heard one come, he writhed like a snake. The soldiers hardly ever laughed when shells were falling into the trenches, but no one who saw Roger could help laughing at him. As soon as he arrived in our dugout, his first question was, "Can one live here without being shot?" We tried to calm him by telling him that the enemy was not aiming at us, but at Roy. "You've done your work well," he told us. "Everywhere I've been, there's not a single house standing. What are all those graves which I saw along the road, marked with caps or helmets? Tell me something about a battle. What really happens?" Then Lieutenant Nolte gave him a terrifying description in which nothing was lacking: the shattered limbs, cries of the wounded, frenzied horses, etc. "Just imagine, Major, I saw one man walking in Tours, with his entrails coming out of his open belly." Roger did not wish to hear any more. He turned pale and drops of perspiration beaded his forehead. He did not eat anything during the entire meal. Nolte's talk had taken away his appetite, but he made up for it by drinking like a fish. Nolte signed to us to hide the wine bottles, because it seemed as though Roger were going to leave nothing for the rest of us. It was astonishing to see how much that man could drink. A professional would have been afraid to compete with him. If it had occurred to the French to attack us that evening, there would not have been much resistance, although we had taken the precaution of doubling sentries. On December 31st, we celebrated New Year's Eve at Gruny, near Soycourt, where we were resting. We heard the muffled roar of cannon, and the sky was ablaze with red and white rockets. This did not hinder the soldiers from joyously firing their guns into the air in honor of the new year, which was to bring us peace. In the evening, everyone was royally drunk. In our battalion, we were all gathered about Roger, who presided. A drunken soldier tried to force his way in with his gun. After he had been thrown out, he came back with a sabre, and if it had not been for Dr. Volkowitz, who grabbed my arm, I should have been stabbed to the heart. Roger wished to have him shot, but his comrades had already hidden him. This little incident, however, did not prevent us from going on drinking beer, wine, and liquors. Soon several officers rolled under the table. Roger was happy. The soldiers were doing the same thing. They fought and made a deafening racket all night long. If there had been an alarm, we could not have assembled even a single company. On January 2nd, a French aviator hovered over our lines for a long while. Our artillery aimed at him in vain. Shrapnel burst about him, but he was not hit. After he had found out what he wished to know, he rose and returned to the French lines to report. Our officers called the artillery pigs and trash because of their awkwardness, but they only laughed. They had no doubt done their best because for every aeroplane brought down, the battery received a barrel of beer. A few days afterwards, we received regimental orders to sound unexpected night alarms whenever the battalion was not on the march. Under Schmidt, these alarms had always taken place at 9 o'clock, so that the men could have a night's rest. No one ever failed to report, and Schmidt was always pleased. But with Roger, everything was different. On January 2nd, 1915, we celebrated the first 6 months of the war. Sergeant Major Hauser, secretary of the battalion, went to Roger in the name of all the non-commissioned officers to ask him not to have the alarm sounded that night, because the non-commissioned officers were going to have a little party. Roger promised. This is how he kept his promise. It seems that the non-commissioned officers drank a great deal. But with us, as soon as one emptied his glass, it would have to be filled again. For Roger's great pleasure was to make all his guests drunk. Some young lieutenants asked permission to go to bed, but Roger would let no one leave. About 3 a.m. Lieutenant von Stein was so drunk that he had to be carried to bed. He looked like a dead man, for he no longer moved a muscle. This amused Roger very much. At 4 o'clock, Roger ordered us to sound the alarm. We reminded him of his promise, but he answered, "This band of peasants has had enough sleep. They must not forget that they are soldiers." The orderlies left immediately to warn the companies. We tried our best to awake von Stein, but in vain. He did not stir. Rogger then told us to pour a pail of water over his head. This measure met with no success. Von Stein continued to snore. So Rogger said to us, "Leave that pig there, the drunkard alone, since there is no way of waking him." We repaired to the meeting place, where the companies were already assembled. But the soldiers were grumbling, and many were Private Merkel, of the 8th Company, whom Lieutenant Nolte, reminded that he had forgotten his saucepan, answered, "Yes, Lieutenant, but I'm not drunk as some others are." The officer commanding the 5th Company was missing, but when Sergeant Major Saltenberger reported this to the chief, the latter answered, "Go to the devil." Rogger collected the commissioned and non-commissioned officers and said to them, "Gentlemen, this is disgraceful. If you and I can report, I am sure these peasants can do as much." Sergeant Major Saltenberger assembled the non-commissioned officers of the 5th Company, and imitating Rogger addressed them in the following manner. "Gentlemen, I'm very much pleased with your answer to the alarm. I promised you there would be none, but nevertheless, I had to disturb your sleep. I regret that the commander of the 5th Company should have been absent, for that's a black mark for us. I advise you, gentlemen, not to imitate him, for we superior officers, whatever our rank, ought always to set a good example. Good night, gentlemen. Break ranks." Rogger, who had heard everything, was furious but could do nothing. A few days later, Sergeant Major Saltenberger was declared unfit for service by the doctor because of his nerves, and was sent back to Germany. Our new position, between Parvillers and Dumery, was more dangerous. All day and all night shells rained down on the trenches. Every day we had 15 or 20 killed and wounded. On February 12th, we were sent to Nesles for a 2 weeks' rest. The city had not suffered much, but the inhabitants complained bitterly of the troops, who were plundering everything. On February 24th, Lieutenant Colonel Brentano reported sick and left for Germany. Rogger was made commander of the 88th. He cleaned out the regiment, as he said. Anspach, the regimental adjutant, was made commander of the 7th Company, and von Stein took his place with Rogger. Nolte, although only a reserve officer, was made Rogger's aide-de-camp. An unheard-of thing, but Rogger could not do without him. Schielein, a wine merchant from Mayence, who up to now had been in the quartermaster's department, lost his place and was sent with Anspach to the 7th Company. Rogger did this to avenge himself on Schielein, because he owed the latter a large sum, and thought to get rid of his creditor by sending him under fire. A short time before, he had asked Schielein for several cases of champagne, and the latter had refused them to him, because he knew that he would never be able to collect for them. Serve Lieutenant Rickert, a theological student, was made adjutant of the 2nd Battalion. That same day, Rickert, Loffelhart and I went to see Major Schmidt, commanding a detachment of young recruits at Ham, to talk over all these changes with him. He told us that there would be a great review in 2 days, and that he would then ask to be returned to his battalion. The review did, in fact, take place before Grand Duke Louis of Hesse, who said that he was very well satisfied with Schmidt's recruits and awarded the latter a medal for bravery. The training of the recruits was over, so Schmidt asked and obtained permission to resume command of his former battalion. All the soldiers were pleased, for they cared a lot for him and called him Papa Schmidt. Of course, relations between Schmidt and Rogger became very much strained. They hated each other, and Rogger made use of every opportunity to criticize Schmidt. On March 5th, we were ordered to throw away our guns and ammunition, because we were going to get Russian guns instead. We were also told to move our camp farther on, because the 3 battalions were to take up quarters on the next day, in 3 villages between Ham and St. Quentin. The 2nd Battalion was to go to Fluquières. The convoys that were bringing ammunition to the batteries of the 210th, stationed at Soyencourt, were there too. Loffelhart and I called on the governor of Ham, who was also the lieutenant of artillery in charge of the distribution of ammunition. He was living in the chateau at Ham. He greeted us pleasantly, and told us that Major Schmidt and his staff were welcome to live with him in the chateau. That night, for the first time since August 20th, 1914, we did not hear the guns. In the town, where we went to find quarters for our men, we were badly received by the inhabitants who complained that they had to entertain soldiers continuously for the last 5 months. One man said to me, We no longer know how to protect our wives and daughters. All the Germans try to get mistresses in any manner possible. The commandant always supports the soldiers, and besides, he himself keeps a young girl whom he has made his mistress in his chateau by force. When we saw the commandant again, we mentioned this matter. Laughing, he asked us if our officers also hunted women, and were in love with some little French girls. Loffelhart told him that we were a fighting unit, and not in the quartermaster's department, also that we waged war on soldiers, not on civilians, and above all, not on women. "My friend, you're amusing," replied the lieutenant. "In any case, I'm prudently going to hide my angel so that no harm will come to her." With that, he left us, to do as he had said. Who was his angel? Probably some unhappy girl whom he was holding in the chateau. We told Schmidt about this, but he only shrugged his shoulders and said that everyone makes war in his own way. As the officer made our stay at Ham as pleasant as possible, Schmidt said nothing to him about it. On March 8th we were quartered at Bohain, where we remained for some time. On March 11th we handled our Russian guns for the first time. Instruction in their use began immediately. We could not understand why they gave us such poor ones. On March 15th we received the following order. The 35th, 88th and 118th Infantry, the latter two regiments forming part of the 18th Corps, will make up the 112th Brigade of Infantry, which will be part of the 56th Division. Each battalion is to furnish 20 men who will form a company of cyclists and accompany the staff of the division. The 56th Division will also comprise a squadron of the 13th Hussars and the 111th and 112th Artillery Regiments, to each of which shall be attached 3 heavy batteries besides their regular ones. The commander of the new division was a General Eberhard, who had been the instructor of Prince Joachim of Prussia. The commander of the brigade was Colonel Munter, who had commanded the 41st Brigade since December 1914. On March 19th we were ordered to be ready to leave in the morning. Our battalion, which thus far had behaved pretty decently, spoiled its reputation, on leaving Bohain by stealing a large quantity of wine. Some men of the 7th Company broke open the door of a cellar, which had been sealed by the commandant, and took possession of all the wine they found there. Almost the whole company was drunk. The sergeant-major, named Dombach, had 200 bottles of wine loaded on a wagon, expecting to drink them later on with his friends. But he did not touch one of them, for we told Major Schmidt about it, and he ordered it all to be taken for the battalion staff. So after all, we were the ones to drink the stolen wine. At 2 p.m. we took the train for Cateau, Charleville, Sedan and Attigny, where we were to stop. The journey was gloomy, and the train no longer bore inscriptions, like there were on that which took us to Luxembourg in August 1914, Express for Paris, or Declarations of War received here. Nature alone seemed oblivious to the war, for the meadows and grain fields were just beginning to turn green. About 10 p.m. we were ordered to make ready to leave Attigny for Givry, where we were to stay until further orders. Loffelhart and I set out to seek quarters for our staff and to find stable room for 120 horses. The governor, a cavalry captain, thought fit to stick Schmidt in a dirty room, which was already occupied by a sick woman, while the rest of us, the doctor included, had to sleep with the men in the barn. Schmidt's rage may be imagined. He was all the more angry because right opposite to him, a young cavalry lieutenant was strutting about a hotel all by himself. The next day he told the governor that he wished to have the hotel vacated immediately, in order to make room for himself and his staff. The magnificent lieutenant was ordered to pack himself off before noon. The latter then started to strip the hotel and to have all the furniture carried outside, not forgetting the German stove. Knowing that it would be impossible to find even a single chair in the village, I warned Schmidt of the lieutenant's action, and he stationed a sentinel with loaded rifle in front of the hotel, with orders to shoot anyone who attempted to carry off anything whatsoever. He told me to inform the lieutenant of this order. No sooner had I delivered my message than this fellow yelled at me insolently, "And who are you, my good fellow? Get out of my way immediately, or I'll strike you in the face with my crop." It was in vain that I told him that I was only giving him Schmidt's message. He wouldn't listen to anything I said. Schmidt, told of this, sent me back with Rickert, whom he ordered to bring the lieutenant to him, by force if necessary. When he saw Rickert, the cavalry lieutenant saluted him politely and followed him without any protest.